Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson and CPD Superintendent Larry Snelling are giving an update on the holiday weekend violence.
And at last check, over 100 people have been shot since last Wednesday, 19 killed.
Good morning,
and
everybody.
That's nearly double the numbers. Let's listen in right now.
First of all, I'd just like to say I'm up here, standing here with Mayor Brandon Johnson, Chief of Detectives, Antoinette City, Chief of Patrol, John Hine, the Director of Community Policing, Glenn Brooks, also Deputy Mayor of Public Safety, Gary and Gatewood, Assistant Deputy Mayor of Community Safety, Natasha Scott, and also the Mayor's Chief of Staff, Christina Zayas. I'd like to start off to talk about the violence over the 4th of July weekend. This past Friday, I was in Greater Grand Crossing for an Operation Wake Up that we hosted for a community that was grieving the loss of 2 mothers and an 8-year-old. Also, 2 other children who were shot and fighting for their lives. There was also a 1-year-old at that location inside the home who luckily and thankfully was not harmed, but was traumatized by the event that occurred in that home. During the gathering, I saw a neighborhood that was heartbroken, angry, fed up, but I also saw a neighborhood that wanted to come together and come up with a plan to fight this type of violence, this type of senseless violence that took the lives of 2 mothers and an 8-year-old child. What we really have to think about is the brazenness and the behavior of those who could walk into a home and see children and women and open fire on them. I mean, it's an amazing thing to think that as a human being that you could walk in and do something like that you could see a child and open fire. When we think about this type of behavior and we think about the people in those communities, it is important to understand that not only is the Chicago Police Department, but everyone in the city of Chicago, the mayor's office, that we provide something. We provide some type of comfort for those who are going through this on a daily basis. I think all too often we don't recognize what people in these neighborhoods are going through, especially as it relates to violent crime. Because of this, we will be hosting an emergency assistance center tomorrow to connect anyone from across the city who needs support for resources. And I'll let Director Brooks talk about that a little later. What I will tell you is that the Chicago Police Department, we're putting forth every effort to deal with this level of violence. What we have to understand is that when we're looking at this type of violence, we look at celebratory days of the year, the 4th of July and other days like it, where groups come together, large groups gather, and sometimes this violence comes out of petty arguments. People who have been together all day, they come together as a group, they've been drinking, tempers flare, and people decide that they're going to air out their differences through violence, especially gun violence. It's important to understand that and think about the effect that gun violence is having on our communities. Just think about that. Again, children who are being shot in our city. Somebody knows something. Somebody knows who the offenders are in these cases. And it's really important that we work with our communities and that our communities understand that we're trying to work with those communities, because the more information that we get from communities, it's helpful to help us apprehend these individuals who are committing these violent acts. We need to take these people off the street, and we need to keep them off the street so that they don't reoffend, so that they don't destroy other families. We have to really stop and think about the mindset of someone who will shoot a child, a helpless child, an unarmed mother, and think that that's okay, and go about their days. Those people have to be taken off the street. They have to be put away. If we're not doing that, then we're failing other families. We're failing people in our city. Chicago Police Department is going to do everything that we possibly can in coordination with the mayor's office, with Deputy Mayor Gary and Gatewood, and the Office of Public Safety. What we want to do is make sure that we provide all the services that we can, but we also want to prevent this type of behavior. But the only way to do that is to apprehend those who are doing it, who are doing these types of crime, and then to hold them accountable, keep them off the street so that they can't do it again. We cannot bring back these children. If we want to avoid having these types of press conferences and these types of meetings again, we need every single person to step up. We need people to start coming forward. We need people to take responsibility. Help us help you. We want to take these people off the street. Our detective division, our police officers, our specialized units are working themselves day and night, sleepless hours, just to try to bring some level of justice to this. Because as our officers walk in and they see people who have been catastrophically injured or murdered, this is something that does not sit well with the men and women of Chicago Police Department when they walk in and see this type of carnage. We want to make sure that we bring a level of justice to these individuals. What I will tell you is this: we make adjustments as we go along. Crime does not sit still. It moves, it changes. And as the Chicago Police Department, we're flexible and we move as crime moves. We make adjustments, and we made adjustments throughout the week as we saw crime patterns hit us really hard. We will continue to do that. We're going to continue to work hard to make sure that we keep this city safe. And we're going to push the envelope when it comes to going after these violent offenders. We have to hold them accountable. Our first order of business should be those who have been victimized by violent offenders. We cannot take our eyes off the ball. We cannot stop thinking about the people who have been victimized by this crime. That is our focus. That should be our focus, and that should be our focus throughout. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mayor Johnson. Mayor Johnson.
Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you again, Superintendent, for your leadership. Today, I stand here today heartbroken. Over 100 people have been shot in this city. 19 people have been killed this holiday weekend. But these are not just numbers on pages. These are not just headlines in the news. No. These are our fellow Chicagoans, our neighbors, family members who've lost their lives. These are 19 families whose lives are forever altered, and 19 families who woke up this morning without a son, without a daughter, without a mother, without a father, without an aunt, without an uncle. Over 100 people whose lives will never be the same, whose next chapter in life is recovery and healing from this violence. These 100 people are members of families and communities, numbering in the thousands, who are also feeling the devastation and the impact of the incessant violence in the city of Chicago. I know all too well how this shows up, as I've often encountered the trauma in my classroom with my former students after a violent and horrific weekend. As a father raising a family on the west side of Chicago, This violence we are seeing, it's very close to home. This violence plaguing our community, it is deeply personal. This is not about just simply tallying our pain. This violence that happened this weekend did not happen in a vacuum, however. No, it didn't. We are standing here today talking about a violent weekend because of generations of disinvestment and deep disenfranchisement in the exact communities where so much of the violence is taking place. But we are here to say emphatically that this is enough. It's enough. When this reckless violence ravages across our city at this magnitude, we are losing a piece of the soul of Chicago. And it deeply pains me to admit that, but it is true. But I will not stand idly by. We will not be passive in this moment. We need to ensure that we are holding every single individual accountable for the pain and trauma and the torment that they have caused in this city. And there will be consequences. There will be consequences for the violence. We will not let criminal activity ruin and harm our city. And I know that our Chicago Police Department is working nonstop to catch those who have committed these heinous crimes. We also need to double down on our efforts to get guns off our streets. When a 16-year-old has access to an AK-47, the violence began well before that weapon reached the hands of young people across this city and across this country. And right now, our streets are filled with illegal guns. It is far too easy in Chicago to go out and get an illegal gun. This has to change. And I know our federal partners at the Crime Gun Information Center will continue to work hand in glove with the Chicago Police Department to track crime guns and hold people who are choosing to wreak havoc on my streets accountable. And finally, I want to announce that I have personally taken steps to ensure that our city is getting all of the resources that it needs from the federal government. And prior to this weekend, my administration took the necessary steps to prepare for what has been historically violent weekends by making sure that we are coordinating the coverage with Chicago Police Department, community violence intervention, all the professionals in these areas of expertise to make sure that we are addressing the higher levels of violence that tends to take place during the holidays. And last month, I called on our federal partners to respond to the mass shootings in the city of Chicago. And I've called upon them to respond to the mass shootings like we've experienced in Chicago, just like they do in other places in this country. And I'm hopeful that our ongoing discussions will ensure that our state partners, as well as our federal partners, will swiftly come to the support of the city of Chicago. The city cannot afford to wait any longer. The full force of government is activated to step up to stop the violence, and we need more support. And I know that the Chicago Police Department and all of our brave officers will be stepping up to stop this violence. They are already working around the clock to keep our city safe. And I know that our community partners, the philanthropic community, the business community, our faith leaders are all going to step up and work together to stop this violence. We need more of that. We need our entire city to step up in this moment. I'm urging all of you across the entire city to step up to say that we've had enough, to step up to stop this vicious cycle of violence. We all play a role because we are all members of these communities. Our city needs each and every one of us to lean and look out for our neighbors, to look out for our children, look out for our communities. But let me be clear. Let me be emphatically clear. This is a choice. It's a choice to kill. It's a choice to kill women, a choice to kill children, a choice to kill the elderly. And these are choices that the offenders made and they calculated. And I'm here to say emphatically that we have had enough of it. We will be working closely with our state's attorney, Chicago Police Department, and every area of government to partner to ensure that we bring swift justice and that we provide at least a piece of closure for the families. We are going finally block to block, neighborhood by neighborhood, to make sure that the city is safe and to ultimately stop this violence. It's because these are not just numbers on pages. These are our fellow Chicagoans. And this is unacceptable.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll have Director Brooks come up. He's going to talk a little bit about some of the programs that we have across the city.
Good morning.
Good morning.
There are too many Chicagoans who have experienced the trauma of violence. We recognize that when these crimes occur, the victims, survivors, are affected, their families are affected, the community as a whole is affected. That's why we have organized an emergency assistance center. At these centers, our crime victim service team partners with community organizations to provide support, resources, services, and information to those who need it. We are hosting the Emergency Assistance Center tomorrow, Tuesday, at Fosco Park, located at 1312 South Racine, from 3 to 7 p.m. Correction, 3:30 to 7 p.m. Through these centers, we set up a response to a shooting that occurred in the 1300 block of Hastings that left 8 people wounded. However, we are ready to serve anyone in need of assistance, whether that trauma was experienced this weekend, last month, or years ago. Our services are free to any type of violence, including domestic violence. You do not need a police report to receive these services. We encourage anyone who is affected by violence, both directly and indirectly, to visit the center and receive service and
Thank you, Director Brooks. With that, we'll take any questions you may have.
My name is Jesse Echeverria with Univision Chicago. You said adjustments to prevent more violence will be made along the way. As you know, this weekend, 3 neighborhoods saw mass shootings. Is CPD planning to do any adjustments immediately in those neighborhoods?
Yes, so what I will tell you is that we did make adjustments. So here's what has to be understood, especially when it comes to what we refer to as mass shootings. We see this across the country right now, not just here in Chicago. And in certain communities, when people get together, everybody has the right to assemble. As the police department, we do monitor those things because we know that there is a possibility that it could lead to some type of violence. However, as a police department, we still have to walk that fine line so that we're not stepping on people's right to assemble. That being said, we still want to make sure that they're doing it safely. So what we've seen in those types of situations is people are assembling, and it's not that it's a group of bad people, but you may have 1 or 2 bad actors within that group. An argument ensues, the next thing you know, someone pulls out a gun, and there are more guns at times, and then the shooting starts. So what we do is we make sure that we monitor those things as best we can. So adjustments were made the following night and throughout the weekend, and we're going to continue to make those adjustments.
Joni Lum at Fox 32. Can you provide an update on any of the investigations? Have there been arrests? Did Operation Wake Up provide any credible leads for you? Is there a development in any of these?
Well, here's what I can tell you, and I don't want to necessarily bring Chief or City up for this. This is an ongoing investigation, and We have leads. We follow the leads that we have. They're still gathering evidence, still collecting information. And I will tell you right now, the Detective Division is working really hard on these cases, especially these the ones that are involving children. And as we move along, what we don't want to do is put too much information out there at once, but we want to make sure that we keep the investigation aligned with what it is that we're trying to do. So it's important to understand that we can't give out too much information, but what I can tell you is that we're working really hard on the leads that we have.
Hi, Sophie with the Sun-Times. You mentioned how a lot of these incidents occurred during celebratory days, large-scale gatherings. What's your response to people who say this weekend is evidence that the department isn't ready for a large-scale event like DNC Week?
Well, you know, here's the issue, and I'm just going to address this issue. When we look at what happened this weekend, we always like to say that it's a police issue. This is a societal issue. The police cannot be in everybody's backyard. They cannot be in everyone's home. They cannot invade every single gathering where there's a possibility that someone may show up with a gun. Everything that we do as a police department is based on reasonable suspicion to investigate or probable cause for an arrest. So what we need to look at is the responsibility of everyone in this. When people get together, we need people to understand that they can celebrate, but do it safely and responsibly. That being said, that when we know that we had someone who committed a crime, especially one of a violent nature, that we need people to step up. You know, cpdtip.com, please give us information. And I'll tell you, most of the cases where we've been able to solve fairly quickly, it's because we've had outreach from the community. So to say that the Chicago Police Department isn't ready is inaccurate. And that's not me attacking your question. It's actually a pretty good question, and I'm glad you asked it. But everyone needs to be involved in this. This cannot just be the police department alone. I've said that since I started this job. It has to be everyone involved. So where we have the authority to step in and make arrests or stop violence when we have information or intel based on that, we will do that. We have done it, and we're going to continue to do it. And as we move along, we make those adjustments.
Next question.
I have an off-topic question, if that's cool.
Introduce yourself, please.
Yes, Carolina Garibay, WBBM. I have a question, and probably more for the mayor, about the Pride Month arrests that we saw at the end of last month. We have seen some calls from some of my colleagues and people calling to move future Pride parades to downtown area. I'm wondering if you can comment on that. Do you agree? What are your thoughts on that?
So again, you know, the city of Chicago, we are known for our celebrations, and Pride Month this year, there was no exception there. It was a beautiful display of an entire community that needs more protection. As far as how we celebrate moving forward, I have an advisory council. It's 21 members in this advisory council for the LGBTQ plus community. It's the largest advisory council that we've ever had in the city of Chicago. It's the first time in 10, 12 years that every single position or slot has been filled. I trust their guidance and their leadership. As these discussions continue, we'll make decisions that are best for the people of Chicago. Thank you.
Hi, Alice Gidd with the Chicago Tribune. This is for both the superintendent and mayor. First off, given how many officers were diverted to Grant Park for NASCAR, is it a good idea to continue scheduling this event during one of the most historically violent weekends of the year for Chicago?
Well, what I can tell you is this, and then I'll let the mayor step in from the police standpoint. We looked at last year where we had a number of officers who were detailed to that particular event. We had significantly less officers at that event this year. We recognized that we had a level of security around that event where we didn't need as many officers. So we were able to scale that down this year, and we'll continue to do that. Mayor.
Thank you, Superintendent. As far as the weekend of NASCAR, obviously those were dates that we inherited. We will continue to assess how this particular weekend for NASCAR, how this particular weekend best benefits the people of Chicago. But I can say, to the superintendent's point, there's been strategic enforcement as well as strategic deployment throughout the entire weekend, as well as you might remember, me renegotiating with NASCAR how to support that deployment, right, with additional dollars from NASCAR. But no decision has been made on which weekend in particular is best suited, because I'll just say it like this. Whether it's a holiday weekend or a weekend that someone is celebrating their wedding anniversary, the point of our work is to ensure that every single weekend in the city of Chicago is as safe as possible.
And to follow up on the renegotiation you made, given this year's weaker attendance at NASCAR, how certain are you that NASCAR can pay the city the $2 million they promised you? And what's the deadline for the city to get that money?
So that's my comptroller's responsibility. I don't just walk around the city collecting checks from people. Our comptroller does a really good job at that. You know, as far as the overall economic benefit, again, that will be assessed and analyzed, and we will make a decision accordingly. All right, thank you.
Mayor Johnson, Sam Charles, also from the Tribune.
Hey, Sam.
Since the 4th, there were at least 10 shootings in the 15th district over the weekend, obviously where you live. I'm just wondering if you or your family heard any of those shots fired, and if so, what went through your head?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Sam. Look, there's no secret where I live, right? You know, that's why this is personal for me. I've shared this. We've had gunshots come through our home, right in my children's bedroom, on our front porch. You know, as beautiful as Austin is, it's a neighborhood that unfortunately has been neglected over the course of decades. Of course we hear shots. I'll never forget a time when children were much younger. There were shots right outside our front door, and you can hear my kids screaming in the other room. My wife and I, we hit the ground. We're crawling to our children's room and just hoping we're not the headline. And it can't be that way. Look, there's a lot to be desired in this moment. There is. And what we've experienced over this weekend is unacceptable. And we didn't get here overnight. And everyone knows that. Let's tell the full story of how we got here. Because if you skip a chapter, it won't give us the ability to actually make the proper adjustments so that we can ensure better, stronger, and safer becomes a reality. But the fact of the matter is, where there is most violence, that's where the poverty is most pervasive. And this is not just unique to Chicago. This is all over the planet. Where there's poverty, there's destruction and terror and torment. Now, as I said, I'll finish with this. We got to hold people accountable. But you know what my ultimate goal is to transform this city so we cut off the pipeline of boys between the ages of 10 and 19 being either victims or the perpetrators. So, yeah, it is personal. Black death has been unfortunately accepted in this country for a very long time. We had a chance 60 years ago to get at the root causes, and people mocked President Johnson. And we ended up with Richard Nixon. I'm gonna work hard every day to transform this city. That's what it takes to build a better, stronger, safer Chicago, and I need everybody to step up and help us do that.
Yeah, Patrick Fazio, NBC5. Mayor, with these shootings and the violence we've been seeing recently, back in May, you introduced that comprehensive summer safety plan. Does that mean that plan is not working?
It means we have to double down our efforts. I can tell you what doesn't work. I can tell you what doesn't work. We all know what doesn't work in this room. Closing schools, shutting down public housing, raiding pensions, not balancing budgets. We know that doesn't work. Everything has already been tried, and it has failed. And what I'm saying is, yes, we got to hold people accountable. And I'm confident in our police department, our superintendent. Our detectives are working overtime. That's why I made a commitment to hire 200 of them. We're almost there within my first term. So we got to solve crime. And our detective division has stepped up and they're doing that. But it's not just policing alone. Look, it's not enough for me to stand here and say homicides are down and shootings are down. It's not enough. You know, so what didn't work over the last 60 years, you're talking about a plan that we put forth in May over the course of a couple of months. Can't give up on the city of Chicago that easily. We can't. In fact, we should never give up on the city of Chicago. We're going to get through this and we're going to get through it together, but it's going to require more than just policing. It's why I reached out over a month ago, I believe, to the federal government for community violence intervention, violence prevention support services, victim support services. Our state and federal government, we've reached out, we made it very clear. The support that we need cannot wait.
Good morning, Mayor.
Good morning.
Good morning. I don't know if this is working, but you can hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. Quinn from Block Club, good to see you. You both called for accountability, help from neighborhoods, communities to help find some of these perpetrators. But what do you say to Chicagoans who see another violent weekend and feel jaded about working with city government, about police, who don't feel like it's even worth it to make that call if they know someone?
Well, that's not our experience, quite frankly. I mean, the superintendent and I, we were out there in the community where this mass shooting took place. Of course, people are grieving. People are hurting. But, you know, I didn't get this sense that somehow folks were giving up. They want justice. No, look, I know that there were a few cynics out there, but they will remain in place. They're a constant. They're just a constant. But the vast majority of the people of Chicago, they know that whether it's policing, whether it's our community violence intervention, our business community, the faith community, all these folks are out here not just grieving, they're taking action. And I'm making this appeal for everybody in the city of Chicago. If I know one thing about Chicago, somebody always knows something about somebody. Say something. Because it is a matter of life and death. Say something. Step up. Say something. And in fact, if you know that there are wayward youth who have lost their way, snatch them up. We have opportunities for them. I'm so sick and tired of losing black boys to violence in this city. It grieves me fiercely. I got a 16-year-old and a 12-year-old, 2 black boys. I never want to experience the pain of having to bury one, and no one should either. Our people are resolved in this city. It's going to take all of us, though.
Judy Wang, WGN-TV. The curfew for 31st Street Beach, have there been talks to extend that, or is that going to end today?
Well, as you know, I'm constantly in conversations with the aldermen, with the police department, with businesses that are over there. The ultimate goal is to keep people safe. What we have is a situation that is far beyond just simply a curfew. We do. Wouldn't it be nice if I could just, as mayor of the city of Chicago, tell everybody to go to bed when I go to bed? But, you know, the violence that happened, this mass shooting with 2 mothers and a baby, happened at 6 o'clock in the morning, is that right? 6:30 in the morning. It's not just simply about curfews. It's about all of us working together to end this cycle of violence.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Jasmine Miner from ABC7. I'm curious if this weekend has made you rethink at all ShotSpotter and the use of that, and what specifically, when you talk about federal support, what does that look like in your eyes? And I do have a follow-up question for the superintendent.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So for federal support, I mean, it's everything. It's everything from boots on the ground to public health support, victims of violence support. As I said before, you know, the fact that it's so easy to get guns in the city of Chicago and cities across America, to me, that's the crime. You have an entire political party that is protecting a lobbyist entity to make sure that illegal guns can flow through the streets of places like Chicago and Baltimore, Miami, Los Angeles. To me, that is criminal. They should be brought up on charges. You know, as far as ShotSpotter is concerned, no, it hasn't.
Just a quick question for the superintendent. Just curious if you can speak to the health of police officers this past weekend. You know, off days were canceled, and obviously with Pride, I think that was the case there. Can imagine officers are tired. To say
Yes,
the least.
and a good question. Thank you for that question. It's important that we make sure that we're aware of the well-being of our officers. We've canceled less days off this year. I think we're down probably 70% in day off cancellations this year for our officers. We're making sure that we're focused on our officers. We had a plan going in to that Pride Day because, again, if it's predictable, it's preventable. And we knew, and let's be honest about what happened at Pride. Those were not your parade goers. Those were people who went into that neighborhood and decided that they were going to commit acts of violence, vandalism, things of that nature, and our officers were ready to deal with that. And that's what happens when we prepare. This is what happens when our officers are prepared. And when our officers are prepared and they respond and they feel good about their response, they're better off. They know that their time was served well. So it's not just canceling days off just to cancel days off. It's to make sure that our officers have enough manpower out there to deal with the situation at hand and make sure that they keep down the violence. It keeps them safe. It keeps everyone around them safe. It keeps the city safe.
Eve Angel Nubian on air, The Female Solution. Considering May 17th was the 70th anniversary that ended 88 years of segregation laws, the Supreme Court ruling that it only existed to keep the status of the Negro down and it was unconstitutional. My question, was Chicago's segregation against Negro blacks, especially black women and children, a factor as to why you did not have a press conference at the time? If not, what was the reason?
I'm sorry, I'm not necessarily tracking the question.
When the two mothers were murdered in their homes and 3 small children were left critically injured, one has since died, what was the reason there was no press conference?
There actually was a press conference.
You and the mayor was not in attendance. That's what I'm referring to.
Well, here, ma'am, when you talk about the initial press conference, this was something that occurred in the early morning hours. We get information out as quickly as we possibly can. Shortly thereafter, we brought the neighborhood together in the Operation Wake Up. I was there, and so was the mayor.
I'm saying
We'll go to the next one.
was there. Was there at the press conference, but you and the mayor was not. That's what I was.
That is inaccurate. I was there, so was the mayor.
Well,
So we'll move on to the next question.
Hi, my name's Whitney Weil. I'm a correspondent for CNN. I just wanted to follow up on the DNC question. A lot of the strategies that you had outlined in your first response are really strong reactions to violence, quick arrests, strong prosecutions. But I was in Kansas City like 8 hours after what is retaliatory violence spilled over into a large event. And certainly that is possible in any city where you're having a large event. So I'm wondering, what is the strategy to make sure you're preventing the types of violence we saw here colliding with a large event at the DNC? What is the strategy?
So here, and what I'll tell you is those are here in Chicago, those are two separate things. One of the things that you'll find here in Chicago with our protests, and we've had multiple protests. As a matter of fact, we've had more protests here this year than I can remember since 2012 when we had the NATO event here. Our officers have responded very well. We haven't had violent clashes with our protesters. We've had our dust-ups, but nothing that made national news. We communicate. Our officers are trained properly in dealing with those types of situations. That being said, we have officers who are training specifically for that. All right, we're looking at a total of 48 hours of training for officers to deal specifically with large-scale protests and the possibility for civil unrest. We're hoping that that doesn't happen. So our officers are trained to deal with that. Now, along with that, we have been working on a neighborhood plan to make sure that we're not pulling resources that are necessary to keep our neighborhoods safe to place down and around the footprint of the DNC. As we go along, you'll hear more information, more press conferences about what we're doing, not only for the DNC and the safety of that, but the safety of each and every neighborhood across the city.
Sarah Schulte, ABC 7. I understand both of you guys were in the Grand Crossing neighborhood on Friday night, I believe. I have a question for the mayor. That is quite a few hours after the initial event. Were you out of town on Thursday?
I was out of town earlier this week.
On Thursday, on 4th of July, you
Yes.
were out of town.
Yes.
Given the fact that 4th of July is known to be a very violent time in the city of Chicago, do you think that was a wise idea to be out of town?
Well, here's what I can say emphatically, that my work never ends. It doesn't. You know, I accept the responsibility of 24/7 on call every day of the week. It's very seldom do I get a chance to celebrate, you know, on a personal level. But, you know, the communications between my office, Chicago Police Department, OEMC, our state and federal partners, none of that stops because I'm out of town. Of course, once I was arrived for the entire weekend, as what has been indicated, we had an early morning call on Friday with our summer operations with Chicago Police Department, Chicago Fire Department, OEMC. Of course, I was there for Operation Wake Up and throughout the entire weekend.
Last two questions. I have a quick question for either one of you on the crisis centers. We've had those before, we've covered them before, and nobody shows up. So I understand you're trying to help victims, but if no one shows up, is that the best use of city resources?
Well, there's other ways in which our partners connect with victims of violence. Our Deputy Mayor of Community Safety, as well as Glenn Brooks, they work very hard to make sure that these services and resources are available to folks. So any and everything that we do is for the benefit of people, and it is always worth investing in people. Thank you.
I could follow up. Paris Schutz, Fox 32. There were a few aldermen that told me they were upset after Thursday ended up being particularly violent, that there wasn't citywide communication on a plan. Were there adjustments made after Thursday, and was there coordination?
Yes, sir. You may have missed that response earlier. You care to repeat that about your adjustments? Thank you.
So basically, we looked at everything that occurred on the 4th. We looked at the hours and the time of occurrence, and we made adjustment to officers' schedules. We started officers later, so that we had officers later into the night, over midnight. Those adjustments were made as quickly as we could make them, and the following night we saw a reduction during those hours. So again, when we see this type of violence that occurs, we make adjustments on the fly.
Final question, please.
Hi there, Priscilla with Telemundo Chicago. Could you please, this is a question for the mayor, could you please describe what are those federal resources you requested for the
Yeah, sure. I'll offer that one more time. So there are a number of resources. So it's victim support services. Let me just make it even real simple, okay? So remember the mass shooting that happened in Highland Park and all the services that they got? That's what we're asking for. That's all. What other suburban places get around the country when mass shootings happen like that, we're just simply saying that Chicago deserves that as well. And so I put that request in, how many weeks ago? At least a month ago. That's all it is. So if you look at the support services that places get when mass shootings happen, that's what we want in Chicago. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Specifically, what, I don't understand, what did Highland Park get that Chicago's not getting? Specifically, what are you talking about?
All right, so I'll repeat it one more time, okay? Victim support, I got you. Victim support services. All right, that's one specific thing, all right? Get that. Victim support services. That's what other places have gotten. We have not gotten enough of that. Community violence intervention and prevention professionals and support services. We have some, we need more. As I said earlier, there are illegal guns that are in the city of Chicago and cities across America. Now, we have a strong operation that's working hand in glove with Chicago Police Department, but we need more boots on the ground to make sure that these illegal guns that you have an entire political party is working to protect, that those don't end up in the hands of the people of Chicago. All right?
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
That's Mayor Brandon Johnson and Police Superintendent Larry Snelling addressing the weekend violence. About 100 people, more than 100 people shot over the course of the weekend, 19 people shot and killed.
You can, of course, get updates at any time on abc7chicago.com and wherever you stream. We will have all of today's developments on Eyewitness News beginning at 11.